The Gummy Minnow is a pattern that Blane Chocklett developed several years ago. It's a really effective fly that imitates Silversides, really any of those Rainfish, those type of patterns that have that more translucent effect and have a prominent silverside or belly sac in it. This is a more simplified version of that. The only time I use silly skin is going to be over the top of the whole fly. The rest of it will really, it's only about 3 materials, very quick, very simple to tie once you get the hang of it. And it's a very effective fly for species of fish like false albacore, bluefish, stripers, really anything. When you see silversides, pull this fly out and you're going to knock them dead. So the first step, I use really any hook. I'm not bent out of shape as to whether you use a short, long shank, just a standard shank hook. I don't tie these any larger than a 1. With very few exceptions, I've tied a couple 1/0s, but these tend to work better on the smaller sized flies. The finished fly is only about 2 to 2.5 inches long. I like the lead tape better than I do regular lead because this lies flatter on the hook. It'll give a better profile when you're done because actually you're going to be able to see through the body. It's going to represent the stomach in the silverside. You see a translucent fish, but then you see a little dark spot right under the belly, and that's what this is. So next thing I'm going to do is with clear monofilament thread, I'm going to layer it on the hook, and I use a lot of wraps because this tends to be a slippery fiber and it will not grab quite the same as nylon will. So I get about good 10 wraps before I cut the tag off. And if you really want to be safe, put a whip finish in there, just 1 or 2, and that'll lock that on there so it's not going to come off. I'm going to take some hollow chromosome flash. And you can use any material you want for this. Sometimes I just use a little bit of silver flashaboo or firefly, and I'll put that on and then put a little bit of really any kind of hair you want over it. It doesn't matter. What I do, there are 2 things that are a little important in terms of the finished fly, is before I do anything I measure the length that I want this to be, and it's only going to be 2 to 2.5 inches long. If you think about a silversides, they're not real long. I mean, I've seen them 5 inches, but probably on average, if you're 2.5 inches long, you're in good shape. 2.5 is a good compromise. So what I do is I take the whole strand and I fold it over from the point where I have my length. Now you notice I have now a long end and a short end. Well, what I'm going to do is cut that long end off, so now that when I fold it over, my ends meet. But I don't want to have this flat paintbrush look at the end. So what I'm now going to do is take this and I'm going to separate and then pull out some of the individual fibers to form a taper. I'm going to make a taper out of this. Alright, so you can kind of see now it doesn't have that flat end. And then I'm going to turn it to the other side and make sure that it does the same thing. Now I'll play with this one just a little bit more. Once you taper one end, the other side should naturally taper off also, because what you're doing is you're pulling all those fibers out of alignment. But sometimes it needs a little extra coaxing. So I have this whole strand tapered on both ends. I'm going to fold it in half, and in the middle I'm going to tie on behind the eye of the hook. And I'm going to leave myself just a little bit of space, not much, so when I have the next material, I'm not crowding the eye. So what I like to do, you can leave this all white, but what I like to do with this is add a little bit of color to the back. So rather than add another material, the DNA actually takes to a marker very well. So the front half of this I'm going to color up with a marker. And if you want, it's easier to do this. You can actually lay this before you tie it in and just color the half facing forward when you tie it in, and then it's a little bit easier to manage than trying to do it now. But this is a grayish color, a light gray. I also like an olivey color on the top. More kind of, you think about what the natural colors are. Any permanent marker will do. This is a design marker, art marker, which I got at, I think it was Michael's or maybe AC Moore. About every color you can imagine. And you just find a couple of colors you like and you pull them out. So once I get that pretty well colored, I'm going to fold that over the top and I'm going to tie it down. So for the time being, I'm going to leave my thread hanging on the fly. Alright, so when you get the silly skin, it comes on a long sheet. So what I do is I take that sheet, I fold one end over, just kind of, what I'm trying to do is get a piece that's about that width of the hook gap, but doubled over. Okay, so you can see I'm doubling it over. Then, that point where the double is, I take my scissor and I cut it straight across. So with that folded piece, again, I end up with the width that's about the hook gate. Now you're going to trim it later, so it can be a little bit more, a little bit less. Then I go for the length, which is, I want it to go past the bend of the hook, but not too far. I want this material to have a lot of movement in it too, but this will help two things. It gives the body more depth to it, and also it helps this from coming back and fouling. So with this, I like the real material on there because it has a lot of movement in the water. And so I'm going to measure to just behind the eye of the hook. Then again, I'm going to take my scissor and I'm going to cut that in half lengthwise. This gets put away for a fly later. This I'm going to use onto here, and as you can see, now I have the right cut that I want for the fly. And the next step is now that I have to remove the backing from the top part, and that's where it gets the tricky part. So you just have to take your time, peel it off, and then you end up with just that little top layer. So now what I do is I'm going to carefully lay it so the center of this So the material centered over the top of the fly from the eye of the hook down to the other material. Now, you grab this other material, get it all together. Okay, and I like to hold it more flat. So if I bind it up this way and I hold it back here more toward the rear, that's okay. But what I don't want to do is get this to be all bunched together right here so that I have no thickness coming out. So I kind of grab this and I hold it a little bit flatter, so it maintains some of the width of the fly. And then I'm going to take this material and, without overdoing it, I'm going to stretch it down and tighten it around. What I have there. So as you can see, now it's all folded straight down. The sticky sides are pushed together, and if you stretch it, this will start to curl on you. So when you push it down, you want to try not to keep that, or you want to keep that from stretching. So now what I do is just kind of grab and pull together the top. Is I take my thread, and this is a step you don't really have to do, but what I like is that kind of pulls out a little bit tighter, and it gives me a much nicer finished look for the front of the fly. Once I do that, then I take this and I tie it off. Again, stretch about 5 or 6 wraps, and then stretch it so that way it won't come out. Now, next step is, as you can see, we're starting to get somewhere. I'm going to take this out of the vise, and I'm going to take my scissor, and I'm going to start at the front, and I'm going to follow the curvature of where I tied in that lead tape to begin with. When I get to the hook, I turn it around, and then I start close to the hair, and I trim that up toward the hook. Okay? And then I try to just use the scissor to serrate around that hook. So now I have everything separated. And really all I should have to do now is pull. And I'll get all that material off. So now, as you can see, I have the shape of the minnow, or the Silversides, that I'm aiming for. And that's a nice little profile, translucent. You can see, if you look in here, you can actually see the little tin that's in there, or the lead that's in there to form the belly sack. And then what I'm going to do here is just tighten up that a little bit. And next step comes to eyes. And these little 2D prismatic eyes are great. Silver, red, you can use chartreuse, whatever color combination that you generally like to use in a fly is fine. The silver gives it obviously that more natural look for the Silversides. In this case, I'm going to use these red. I like these red eyes on this. It makes it stick out a little bit. Rotate it, do the other side, and then I'm going to press them on there. So that'll temporarily hold them, but obviously they're not going to stay on very long with just that little bit of support. So next step before I do anything, just to kind of add that color through, I take my marker, same one I use for the fibers on the tail, and I just put it over the top of this fly. So now I have the color running all the way down the top. You can see that stripe, and it goes into the tail, and that blends in. So basically that's the whole fly. If you want to take a marker and add gills at this point, you can just get a little red Sharpie and just right behind the eyes add it. I usually don't deal with that step. But what I do is I get clear cure goo. I use the flex. And what I'm going to do is take this and just a very thin bead. I'm going to spread it over the seam. And that just gives a little extra protection because, again, for bluefish, false albacore, they are toothy critters and they will tend to tear the fly up a little bit more than stripers anyway. And this just gives it a little added durability. Really, it's so easy and fast to tie that if I lose a fly per fish, I'm not going to run home crying. So that works out pretty good. And then just to kind of hold them in, like I said, the eyes are just stuck on there. If you put a little bit of goop on your eyes and stick them on there, you don't have to do this step. But I figure since I have it out and doing the body anyway, it doesn't hurt to add a little bit. But the whole idea here is just to give the slightest coverage that you can over the head of this to hold the eyes in, and not really covering up much of the silly skin. And then that bottom, that seam is actually pretty good. It blends in pretty well. Pretty sparse. No bubbles. Take your light, hit it. And you're done. For me, the end is still a little bit bushy, so I'll take my scissor and I will kind of go through, give it a little more of a haircut so that I get more of a taper to the end. And that's what it'll look like. It's a great little fly. It's worth the time and effort to learn how to tie it, put the materials in. Very effective. I hope you have as much luck as I've had with it.